Hi, I'm Patrick, and this is my first novel, and I'm going to share the whole thing for free because it's the first book I've ever written. And while it took 2 years, I think the final result isn't really something I want to sell, but I still would like to share it and then also kind of work through my process in writing it and what I learned afterwards. So without further ado, I present Sule, Book 1. Prologue. When the last stars cooled and darkness fell, 9 gathered to bring an end to all. They burned the shadow to ash, then by the ashes reborn, to return us to the light. The Second Alcadia, Book of Gormad, year 993. The silver-sailed ship fell from a dark sky. It spun lazily through the evercloud, the curling wisps of red gas leaving trails like blood. 2 figures, one clad in black and one in white, danced to the tune of death. Their arena was the confined yet vast space of the ship. Its hull gleamed with accented silver, pockmarked by telltale craters of battle in the splintered durawood. Loka Durrell sprinted down a long corridor. The wall had a gaping hole, exposing him to the rich dark of space and its glaring stars. Aether rushed in, and the lightness filled his lungs. Loka grinned like a madman as he leapt the gap between the floorboards. The corridor was lit by a blinding flash, followed by a deafening crack of sound. Loka's cloak fell to the floor, a smoldering hole expanding in the fabric. A curse sounded behind him, but he paid it no heed. He didn't have long. All around, the great ship creaked and groaned. The floor shifted beneath him. Loka began to slip on its blue velvet surface. He adjusted his footing as the ship spun, shifting his weight so that his practiced feet found new purchase on what had been a wall a moment before. The rapid footfalls of his pursuer echoed close behind. Through the viewports that passed in a blur, Loka could see the planet below, continents visible against pale green oceans. The grav masts that extended from the hull were covered in torn, shredded sails, their inner mechanisms trying desperately to keep the great ship righted, though only succeeding in waving about uselessly as they fell deeper into the gravity well. This murder was getting more complicated than he would have liked. Loka struck out his hand for balance as the ship once more began to roll. This time he found himself falling forwards as the space in front of him became his new down. He grappled for a handhold to slow his descent, his soot-stained fingers smashing painfully into wall lamps and porthole frames. He clenched his eyes shut and braced himself as a wall flashed up to meet him. Pain jolted through him as he crashed through a thin door carved from the opalescent shell of some monstrous creature. It exploded below his feet, absorbing a part of his fall as he smashed sideways into something more solid in the corridor beyond. As he groaned, so too did the walls around him, shifting once more so that his crumpled body slid to the floor proper. He blinked as the distant bright white and gold uniform of his pursuer became visible through his blurred shock of vision. Loka groaned as he rose to his feet and limped away, turning into a cavernous chamber. An ornate, transparent dome covered this part of the ship. Space rolled past outside the crystalline lattice as the vessel began to pick up speed. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm bleated, hinting towards their impending fate. There was still normal gravity here. The sap drive must still be burning. Mahogany and oak walkways curved into a marbled stone floor that would have held hundreds of slow-dancing figures in better days. Crushed furniture and shattered chandeliers were now the room's only occupants. Those with any sense had fled some time ago. Locust spotted the remains of a cake, only partially crushed between a table and a set of chairs. He knelt and pulled his finger through the icing, then placed it into his mouth. He closed his eyes and made a small sound of satisfaction. Loka! The man in white stood behind him, his hands raised, a face twisted with rage. I know it's you, but it can't be. Loka didn't turn. Instead, he shifted his gaze to look out at the space beyond the dome. Loka could feel the air about the man's figure distorted by wards. He pushed silently, probing for a weakness in the invisible roiling power. The prince's defenses were strong, but it was to be expected. Loka paused, then spoke in a somber tone. I remember when you were small, Alexander. You used to tell me so many times how you wanted to sail the frontier on a great ship like this. Loka ran his torn fingers over the wooden balustrade, wincing as they left a red streak in their wake. So it is you, Alexander Vasting hissed through clenched teeth. I watched your ship burn in the Battle of Elos. The gods announced your fate after the Wraith ate what was left. Nothing survived. How are you here? Loka smiled a sad smile. The golden yellow of his eyes, ringed by black, glinted as he turned to look at his pursuer. He had been dead a short time ago. It wasn't pleasant, but sometimes one could make a deal with death if they had the right leverage. He stroked his gray sideburns thoughtfully. A trick of the light, I'm sure. Impossible. Grail knows all. Does he really? Loka's smile finally thinned. I read you stories. Have you forgotten? Continued Loka wistfully, changing the topic. Jezebel was always preoccupied, probably with that little backstabbing of hers. Such is the ailment of every immortal creature, always plotting for the long term. Maybe she was wise in the end to see the danger in my game. So it was just you and me. Just the prince and the king. Loka shook his head. So many died. Your armies slaughtered my house when your mother turned on me. I lost everything, and you're complicit. Look at you, lapping up Grail's words like a foolish dog. Alexander's fingers clenched. The shimmer in the air grew more noticeable. A barely visible violet light. Small electric arcs curled over his hands. Heretic! You dare talk about family to me? Yelled Alexander. Stop this play, and rid yourself of that ridiculous disguise. A bolt of white energy whipped out and struck the blur of Loka's outturned hand. Loka yelled as he redirected the arc into a wooden column, which promptly exploded into 1,000 piercing shards. Loka stumbled away, just a hint of a smile still on his lips. His features shifted rapidly. His hair changed from gray to raven black. His eyes were as dark as night. He laughed loudly. His visage had changed from old and wizened to ageless and handsome. There he is, hissed Alexander. Heretic, Loka snarled. I am your religion, you fool boy. I am your god. Another bolt of light sent Loka retreating to the center of the ballroom. He twisted and angled his fingers to discharge his own return arc, grimacing as the pain from the discharge shot up his arm, a faint bruise blossoming along its path. Every casting left its mark. Even a god had to be careful. Duels were fast, savage things, because they had to be. Alexander paused for only an instant to twist the energy with his fingers, throwing it into a dozen tangential arcs that left molten rock where they fell against the marble floor. The sound as the energy ignited air and stone was deafening, sending reverberating cracks echoing through the hall. A normal man would be deaf and blind, but a normal man the prince was not. Loka cursed himself. He had always been more of a plotter than a fighter. Perhaps he'd lost his edge with his old body. No, surely it was still there, just buried deep in his head. Loka deflected another arc into a wooden column, sending shards and embers flying into the air. Conjured drawers filled with folders opened in his mind as the flickering imaginary servants ran backwards and forwards, pulling files, tossing the images of countless battles up from the depths in a cloud of flickering memory. In a moment, Loka was not who he had been a moment before. He was someone older, more dangerous. Alexander's motions were confident as he forced Loka back, but Loka was beginning to remember. "Looks like you've overestimated yourself," snarled Alexander. Loka's lip curled. A rapid exchange of thunderclaps detonated what remained of the glass surfaces in the room. In the midst of a cacophony of deadly arcs, Alexander pulled and fired his pistol. The bullets slowed in midair and lit up like small suns as they impacted Loka's own wards. A glowing spray of molten metal sizzled against Loka's arm, extended protectively to cover his face. In the next instant, Loka saw Alexander hurtling towards him, a thin sword drawn. The blade was an Alcure's weapon, a ceramic that was all but invisible to him. His Alcure could not touch it. Loka reached for his own sword, only to find his hand grasping at an empty scabbard. Loka looked up, the playfulness gone from his expression. A flash of fear crossed his face. He may be a god, but death was always a possibility. Just a very unlikely one. It was then that the ship split in two, the tail ends rising up as the two halves slammed together like a cosmic nutcracker. The dome exploded with a crash, and there was a roar of wind as the ship lurched and the prince stumbled past. Loka saw it all as a slow dance of fate. He reached out, his hand burning through the prince's protective wards, his skin erupting in blisters as if he'd submerged it into boiling water. He barely touched skin, but in that instant he stopped the prince's heart. Alexander fell to the floor, his eyes bulging as he clutched at his chest. Loka waved away the remaining hostile air as the protections evaporated, interrupting Alexander's futile attempts to restart that all-important drumbeat. "They adore you, you know," said Loka. He stood over the fallen prince with a grave expression. "The houses, the church, perhaps even Grail." He sighed and knelt down. "This all serves a purpose. Your death serves a purpose. You are the start of it. Your death puts the wrong people where they need to be." "You won't win," gasped Alexander. "You already lost. Empire is eternal." Loka laughed. Winning, losing, this poor demigod child would never see the bigger picture. Loka's brothers and sisters were truly the lost, corrupted by time. He hadn't cared about winning or losing, because he had remembered the purpose that they had long since forgotten. There was only the truth, and it was a heavy burden. "I see. Grail." Alexander stared upwards, the stars spinning in his eyes, tears beating in their corners. "You see an abomination of time and space," said Loka. "An ancient mistake, one that I intend to correct." Then he whispered something to Alexander, and the prince's eyes widened, and then he was dead. Loka stayed crouched for a moment. Then he too looked up into the deep. "It won't be long now, old friend," he murmured. Chapter 1. The Town at the Edge of the Universe. Outers. There's thousands of different species in the Empire. Everyone's an outer to everyone else, yet somehow we all get along. Well, I guess it depends on your definition of getting along. Titan Ross, Jatuan Colony Barkeeper, year 16,212,224. The grass rolled as waves across the green hills as Sule crouched down between the stalks of bond sugar. The red clay pushed up between her toes as she pulled the crossbow to her shoulder. She rubbed her nose, holding back a sneeze as the sweet pollen swirled in little eddies. The bond sugar knew before the storms came, their sweet buds bursting in little golden clouds. Soon the next season would arrive, the kiax or the chaos, followed by the harsh heat and the choking steam. Sule waited. Her dark eyes scanned the underbrush. Adorned across her face were small dotted markings curling up around her cheeks and forehead, the same color of freckles. She'd learned in time that it was best to stand still, not to give chase or plant traps like her grandfather did. The Jolly would get calm then. They'd come out of the burrows and forage. She was good at that, she thought. Thinking. Nobody else around these parts did much of that. Of course, being different marked her more than her face, as an outer, and that neutralized any advantage thinking might have had. There was a rustle as a brown shape darted past. Sule pulled and let the bolt fly with a low-sounding snap, which was followed by a scream. "Good," said her grandfather as she handed him the crossbow. Ansel was a big man with broad shoulders. His silver hair contrasted against a heavy oilcloak adorned with tools. Sule took a breath, strode forwards, and stopped to look at the animal as it twitched and gaped with its tiny mouth, blood seeping from the bolt in its side. Those tiny eyes were all too human. "Here." Ansel turned to her and held out a hammer. Sule gripped the wooden handle and strode forwards. The Jolly's eyes were wide with pain, fear. Would she end up on the other side of the hammer one day, looking up at someone else as they looked down at her? Ansel sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Sule. Sule brought her hammer down, and it was over. As the sky faded to a dark gray, they passed through a ravine, cut deep into the mossy rock. The breeze swept along the winding path, its stones polished by centuries of foot traffic. Sule's mess of thick brown hair rustled about her shoulders, which were laden with her catch, along with the pelts and stiffened game from her grandfather's traps. "Why are you making me carry all of this?" said Sule irately. "Life demands it," said Ansel with a shrug. "When I was your age, I had it much worse." He bit into an apple and followed behind her, then continued through the mouthful. "Without suffering, your mind becomes fat and lazy." "One to talk," Sule muttered under her breath. "What was that?" Sule's attention drifted to the brine pools as they passed. The circular ponds dotted the plains to the base of the hills. She licked her lips. Thekpens, maggot-like grubs with thick gray skin, an oddity of Tolgerum, but a delicious one. Farmers waded through the brackish water, tossing feet into the churning surface. They wore the same earth-toned garb, overlapping cloaks and scarves to keep out the growing chill. Their faces also shared the dotted patterns every Tolgermite was born with. "Why don't we farm Thek? We'd make more money." "Stop daydreaming," said Ansel in a low growl. "We make do with what we have," said Sule with a sigh. How could he not have any sense of adventure? Ansel had zero ambition, negative ambition even, like he was always trying to make himself look smaller, like he would only be content when he had managed to transform entirely into a shadow. "Watch your tone," said Ansel, smacking the back of her head. Sule rolled her eyes. "The deep's filled with nothing but pain and war and brutality. They don't respect our kind out there," said Ansel. "We live here now, and we are safe here. We don't draw attention to ourselves. No ideas." The town of Dendold lay before them now, nestled in the center of the valley. They walked on until they passed through the imposing wood doors of the village gate, past the sentries, down the dirt streets, past the little domed huts, finally stopping at the front of the butcher's store. Sule dropped their bounty on the table and then turned to go. "Sule," said Ansel. Sule stopped at the doorway, not turning around. "Be back by dinner," said Ansel. Sule weaved her way around the caravaneers and down a side street. She walked past the lamplighters and their long poles and along the road with the big stack houses, looking in through the windows with envy. She stopped for a time in the alleyway outside Dendold's only tavern, the Radeveg, listening in to the caravaneers' stories as they filtered out the window. She snuck through another alley, making a quick stop at a shop stall while the owner wasn't looking, then fled with haste to the wall and slipped quietly back through the gates. A thick mist had begun to blow into the valley, and a light rain beaded on her arms and shined her face. She continued along a path that wound up towards the mountains. Sule stopped at a hill that gave way to a ledge. She kicked a rock, watching it fall, and her foot hovered there for a moment before she drew it back. Sule heard a snicker from behind her, then another. "Shut it, she'll hear," hissed a voice. Sule's heart sank. She hadn't been paying attention. Sule made a slow turn to face the group emerging from the brush. They called themselves the Alder Boys, though it wasn't only the boys who joined in. The discontented youth from Dendold would roam the fields toward dusk. They'd throw rocks at unsuspecting passerby, terrorize farm animals, and above all look for their most prized target, the outer girl, the Nornling. "What do you want?" said Sule. But it was pointless to ask. She already knew. "We want you to jump." "Why not do it?" one of them said. More snickering followed. "Save us the trouble." "Jump, jump, jump," came the all too familiar chanting. She turned around to run, but she hit a wall. She looked up and was faced by a giant that blocked her path. Pads. He towered over her and above the others. He had a fat face and perpetually open mouth. He was simple, but his fists hurt and he did whatever the others told him to. Sule pulled her hammer, cursing that she hadn't thought to bring a knife, and it would take too long to knock an arrow. They were on her in an instant. A blow hit her in the head and she fell before she could get a full swing in. Her hammer was pried from her fingers by a dozen grasping hands as she was forced to the ground. Sule watched in dismay as her pack and bow fell and fell and fell with a slow roll before it vanished into a brown pool in the depths below. They dropped her in the field, though the field was still better than the alternative. They didn't have the guts to do her in, at least not yet. Sule clawed her way back to her feet, only to be knocked back down. She gritted her teeth through the pain and spat out another mouthful of the watery clay, its metallic tang lingering at the back of her throat. "Leech, leech, leech," chanted the boys and girls surrounding her. Their heads were bare, and they were wearing oil cloaks, the same brownish red as the muddied ground. "Leech in the mud, sucking on blood." Dadin, the eldest and therefore their leader, loomed over her. The head of her hammer rested next to the hilt of a knife that glinted in the loop of Dadin's belt. "We should shave that disgusting mat off your head. See if you've got the cereal under all that filth." He rubbed his finger across her face, smearing the pattern she'd painted. Dadin sneered. "You'll never be one of us." "No cereal, no soul, no cereal, no soul." Sule was lifted once more by a dozen different hands and was rocked back and forth while she struggled. And then she was soaring through the air, through a doorway, and down a series of stone steps. Sule groaned as she rolled to a stop in the shadow of her tormentors, standing silhouetted in the light of the exit. "Know your place, Nornling," spat Dadin. Sule scrambled to her feet and rushed for the door, but it was slammed shut. She rammed into it with all her strength, but it was no use. She could hear the hollering from the other side as a wooden bar was lowered hastily into place. "Let me out!" she screamed, the rage making her eyes run with tears. They were awful, stupid animals, no more aware than the jolly she'd killed in the field. She'd kill them now, if she could only get the dirt, and she'd... "Too late," came Dadden's voice. "Now you're in the ground, where you belong." Then the laughter faded into the distance. It was quiet, and Sule stepped back, suddenly cold. She stood there for a moment, facing the door, and then turned to survey her surroundings. She was in a circular hut recessed into the ground, the kind that was used by the families to store old equipment or last season's harvest. Now it was mostly empty, just boxes and barrels and farm tools collecting dust. Sunlight filtered in through the crooked wood panels that made up the walls. They were thick and sturdy, and no amount of kicking would make them budge. Dust sparkled in the beams. Sule made her way around, rubbing her bruises, gritting her teeth in frustration and sniffling as she wiped the blood leaking from her nose. She peered inside the crates, finding a straw hat that was too big for her, which she put on. Sule did a little dance. Then she sat, poking sticks into the bare earth floor and watching the shadows move. Somewhere thunder rumbled in the distance, and to her own surprise she dozed off. When she woke, it was by the sound of footfalls outside. The light had become dim in the final hours of the day. There was a rapping at the door, and Sule's heart jumped with excitement when she recognized the voice. "Sule? Are you in there?" "Sule," called another voice. It was Oliver and Jetta, the only people in Dendel she could call her friends. "Yes," called out Sule. She rushed to the door, and the beam was lifted, and the door creaked open. She squinted into the light. "Thought we'd find you here," said Oliver with a grin. "We overheard the others by the gate gloating about locking you up." His face was streaked with mud from working in the pools. Jedam, a younger, round-faced boy, peered out from behind him. His jacket was crusted with salt from riding the fishing gliders, half a day's walk from Dendold, where the land gave way to the sea. They looked just like the other Toldrimites, with not a hair on their head, and they had the Cyril, yet they were the only ones who dared get to know the Nornling girl. They were also outcasts in their own way. Oliver's mother was from the city, and nobody liked the city folk, and the city folk didn't like the Wilders, the city folk's name for anyone living outside their towering city walls. Jedam was, well, Jedam. The fisher folk were all a bit strange. Jedam peered at her. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," said Sule. Sule hugged Oliver, who blushed as Jedam stood beside awkwardly. "Let's get out of here," said Oliver. They turned to go, taking the long way back to the town, taking care to avoid the main road. "You'd come help it," said a voice from behind them. "Like Carmen clockwork." Sule jerked her gaze to the boys and girls emerging from behind the hut, sinister intent to lighten their faces. "Halshat," cursed Jedam. "Run," whispered Sule. The Alderbors were right on their heels as they sprinted through the fields. Sule yelled a curse as one of them grabbed on, and a long strip of her cloak tore free. "You!" Dadden screeched with taunting delight. "Today's the day I kill you!" Sule tripped and then scrambled back to her feet, sprinting harder into the field until the stock slapped her face and her legs burned. "Nornling filth!" There came a long stream of curses fading into the distance. Sule collided with someone and fell into the ground in a jumble of limbs. She scrambled back, then relaxed when she saw it was Oliver. He put his finger to his lips. By now the clouds were dark with rain, and the first heavy drops began to soothe her hot skin. They waited there, crouching low, breathing heavily, listening to the hooting sounds of the older boys. "Where's Jedam?" whispered Sule. "I thought he was with you," said Oliver. There was a scream and a hollering of laughter back the way they had come. Sule let out a groan. Jedam was in a clearing, and Dadan and the others had tied and gagged him with a dirty sock and twine. They stood in a circle around him, imposing in their cloaks and bare heads. As Sule watched, Dadan raised his hand to his mouth. "We got your little man-whore, Nornling Leech girl," bellowed Dadan at the top of his lungs. "Come get him!" "What do we do?" whispered Oliver. "We can't fight them. There's too many." Pads kicked Jedam in the stomach. Sule could see one eye was swollen and red. She chewed her cheek, trying to come up with a plan. "We have to do something," Oliver whispered urgently. "I'm thinking," Sule whispered back. Her eyes scanned the clearing, looking for anything that could help. Her cabin was too far away. There wasn't time to get Ansel. A fresh kick split Jedam's lip, and he screamed through the sock as blood began to trickle down his face. "Leech!" called Dadan. No, they had to do something now. Another kick and another groan of pain. Pads, he was just standing there. He'd take anything, everything literally. There was no fantasy in his world. His reality could be molded like the clay beneath her feet. If only... Sule felt around her pockets for anything to use, and then she saw the feather on the ground, long and white. There was a distant boom of thunder. Oliver took a step forwards, but then Sule put out her arm in front of him. "Go. Run," she whispered. "I'm not going to run. He needs help," Oliver whispered back. "No," hissed Sule. "Run fast and make lots of noise." Oliver paused. But, just do it," said Sule. "I'll try to untie him. There's no other way. Not fast. They'll keep hurting him. They don't know when to stop. They could kill him. And maybe I can deal with 2, but not..." She counted 6 now, less than before. The big one, Dadan, 3 other boys from the town, and a scrawny girl with a long, freckled face. "I just need to untie him. It's getting dark," Sule whispered. "They won't see us if we can get into the grass." "You're crazy," whispered Oliver. "But I'll do it if you want. You're sure?" Sule took her hand off Oliver's chest, giving him a small smile. He nodded, taking several deep breaths, and then stepped into the clearing. "Hey, cornbrains!" Oliver yelled as a head snapped towards him, and then he darted off to the left, away from Sule and back towards town. "Get him!" yelled Dadan, and the older boys ran into the grass in hot pursuit. Or most of them did. Sule held her breath, watching Dadan as he paused at the edge of the clearing. "Pads, stay with Pipsqueak," he said, gesturing between the giant and the 2 remaining elder boys. Then he was gone, running off after Oliver. Sule waited a moment to be sure Dadan had left before she let out her breath and stepped into the clearing. Their eyes locked on her. Jedam's good eye widened. He shook his head and yelled something through the sock. Pads dropped him into the mud and the thunder boomed. Closer this time. "What are you going to do, Leech?" said the weaselly-looking boy. "Fight us?" said the scrawny girl. Pavina was her name, and she in particular hated Sule. Pavina lowered her head and gave Sule a mocking smirk. Sule moved forward slowly to their right. She didn't have any weapons, but it looked like they didn't either. That was good. She could work with that. "Just leave," said Sule. "Like Dadan said, I'm a waste of time." Weasel Boy spit into the dirt and started rolling up his sleeves. "I'm gonna enjoy this." "Yeah," said Pads thickly. "Gonna enjoy this." Ansel had taught Sule a lot of things, but fighting wasn't one of them. "If you ever need to fight," he had said, "if you can't run, you've already lost." Big lot of help he was. "I'm a Nornling, remember?" Sule looked at Pads and grinned devilishly. "Maybe I'll curse you." The lightning flashed at the perfect moment, and Sule had to stop herself from pumping her fist. Alchemy, before the war as the legends go, was common among the fallen gods' people. Unfortunately, it was just a legend, but one she really wished was true now. The things she would do if she could control lightning. Sule watched Pavina through narrowed eyes. Pads looked between the others, doubt and fear spreading across his face. Just like the jelly before the end. "Kenny," he yelled with his thick words. "What'd she do?" Sule's eyes darted to the weasel-faced boy. Yes, Ken was his name. That was right. There wasn't a place Pads would go without him by his side. She'd have to deal with him. "Don't listen to her," said Pavina as she advanced. "Alchemy's a myth." "Yeah," said Ken. Ken began to circle around the other side. "What are you going to do, Pads?" yelled Sule as a gust of wind rushed through the grass. Lightning flashed again as she circled around him. He looked torn, looking between his friends and Sule. "You don't want to be cursed, do you? You'll turn into a thek, or even worse, a chicken." Pads looked at her with horror. "No," he yelled with genuine terror. "Not a chicken." Pads had been chased by a rooster as a toddler. Ever since, there was nothing more vile and terrifying in the world. "Too late," called Sule, dodging out of the way of Ken's fists. "You're already cursed." She pulled out the feather. "What's this?" she cried. "It's from you." "No!" Pads screamed. "Shut up, Pads," yelled Ken. "It's not real. She's lying." "Cluck, cluck, cluck," said Sule, dodging another tackle. "Bagak!" "It's real," cried Pads. "She's one of them. She's an Orling. She cursed me. Undo it." Pavina slammed into Sule, tearing at her hair as Sule fell. Sule kicked back and rolled as she saw the Ken boy rush to help. Sule yelled and grabbed Ken's ankle as he tried to kick her. He fell and then she bit down, tasting blood. Ken screamed. Sule only bit harder as Pavina's foot landed agonizing blow after blow into her back. Then all at once, a great force wrenched them off her. "Stop!" bellowed Pads. There were tears in his eyes as he held the struggling forms of the two older boys. "Make it stop!" "Pads, you idiot!" screamed Pavina, punching uselessly at the tree trunk of an arm. "I will. I'll stop it," said Sule as she rolled, dazed, to her feet, to stumble to Jedham's side. You didn't have to. Said Jedham as a sock came out of his mouth as Sule's hands frantically worked to undo the clumsy loops of the binding. "This is my fault," said Sule frantically. "I'm fixing it. Run." Jedham took off into the grass and Sule followed. She paused as she saw Pad's free-flowing tears and wondered if she should tell him, then thought better of it. She dove between the stalks. "What are you going to do now?" Jedham asked once they had made their way to safety. "Now or tomorrow?" said Sule as she examined her new injuries. She'd feel awful in the morning. "Tomorrow, I guess," said Jedham. "That'll put me over my thinking quota," said Sule with a grin. "I wasn't planning on being in town anyways." "He's going to be looking for you," said Jedham, wincing as he gingerly touched his swollen eye, which was already beginning to turn dark. "It's been a long time since I saw him that mad. I hope Oliver got away." "He got away," said Sule assuredly. Jedham looked down at the ground. "Why are you here?" asked Jedham. "What?" said Sule. She blinked, taken aback. "I mean," said Jedham slowly, grimacing. "Back there, that was amazing. You're not like us, I can tell. You shouldn't be here. Not like in a bad way, but like meant to do something greater kind of way." Sule watched him quietly as Ansel's mantra repeated in her mind. "I make do with what I have." She wasn't great, and she sure as hell wasn't lucky either. "But you don't," said Jedham, looking up at her in that peculiar sort of way he did with everyone. Then he turned and headed off into the grass. "Ma's be wondering where I am. I'll see you later." "See you," said Sule quietly. Then she was alone, like she was used to. Jedem didn't understand. Or maybe he did. She sighed. Sule wanted to matter in the world. She'd give anything for it. But the fact was that she didn't matter. She was born an outcast. Nobody would ever want what she had. The grassy plain began to climb upwards into a slope and a range of hills. She continued on, reaching a plain littered with boulders. The boulders were tall and smoothed over by centuries of weather. Red stains of forgotten runes could still be seen etched deep into their sides. Far in the distance, through the haze of rain and mist, a thin line of smoke rose from a hut situated at the peak of an outcropping of stone. The hut she called home at first glance could be mistaken for another misshapen rock. It was given away by the warm yellow glow spilling from its windows. The home was small, but big enough for her and Ansel. Sule sighed and pulled her cloak tighter, hunching her shoulders as she made her way up. The hair on her neck prickled as she reached for the door. Through the mist, she was sure she saw something move. But no, there was nothing out there in the darkness. She turned back with a shrug. "It's almost time," said the watcher, its mouth unmoving, the yellow glow of its eyes observing the hill. The wind rushed across the grass, transforming it once more into a flowing sea. The door of the hut shut as the girl retreated inside. The rain now was falling in heavy sheets, beaded on the watcher's coat of fur, which was not fur. The fur looked like the darkest oil. It appeared to shiver, drip, and melt into itself. The watcher had assumed the shape of a perfect hunter, lithe, agile, and deadly. A large bloodhound with similarly glowing eyes and drooping jowls made of oil joined the house cat as it sat in the mud. "Olna," said the hound by way of greeting. "Jesper," replied the cat. "She's not ready," said Jesper. "The guardian has not prepared her. The thread is weak." "Perhaps," said Olna, licking its paw with a black tongue. "But even a weak thread can be woven into the whole. Should we warn her? In the time before we would have." "We are here only to report. There are explicit instructions," said Jesper. "We are not to intervene. The trader's coming as was foreseen." The hound and the cat sat together, unbothered by the weather, and watched the hut on the hill in silence. "I will stay close. It is what it would want," said Olna. "Very well," said Jesper. "It will not be easy for her," said Olna. "There will be sacrifice," agreed Jesper. They looked up to the dark clouds in unison, their noses sniffing the air. "They've arrived," said Olna. "Should we go?" said Jesper. "Let's wait a while," said Olna. "Things will move quickly now." Chapter 2. The Two-Faced Uncle. "The soul is in all living things. It is what gives us life. The soul is eternal. The soul must be protected. Cast in time, they rule beyond death. The gods save our souls from harm. In return, we give our obedience." The One Book of Iliad, year 12,111,212. Sule slumped into the chair, exhausted. Then she perked up as the mouth-watering aroma of stew filled her nose. Her eyes locked on the pot simmering above the fireplace. She plunged in a ladle, pausing halfway through, slurping up a wriggling theck. Ansel was sitting in his armchair, watching her with his spectacled gaze. His eyes fell to her ruined coat, then rose to her bruised face streaked with dirt. "You're late for dinner," he said. He didn't comment on her missing pack or the stark absence of her pelts. The Thek plopped back into the bowl as Sule watched him, her cheeks stuffed with soup. "I went for a walk," said Sule through the mouthful. "Off the side of a cliff." She swallowed. "I don't want to talk about it." "We'll need to get you a new cloak," said Ansel. "And a new everything else." He didn't seem fazed. In fact, he never was, and Sule hated him for it. Just once she wished he would get mad about anything. She got the sense that he was far away, that he wasn't actually in front of her, that he was a ghost. The real Ansel was lost somewhere else on some distant battlefield. "You can come with me to town tomorrow to sell the rest of the pelts." "I don't want to sell pelts," said Sule sharply. Ansel watched her for a moment, and then went back to reading. It was always like this. Sule lay back in the chair and tossed a candy up in an arc and into her mouth, then another one. Ansel's hand darted out, snatching the second piece from the air. He rolled it out and held it between two fingers, then raised an eyebrow. Miss Radvin would never sell them Lavab, even if they had all the money in the world. "You need to stop antagonizing them," said Ansel tiredly, speaking as he chewed. "There's more," said Sule. Ansel's chewing slowed and he held out his hand. "Why do I have to be a hunter? Why can't I be a weaver or a farmer?" She trailed off as she saw the look on Ansel's face. Ansel growled deep in his throat. He got to his feet and then stood above her, and she cringed away. "You really want to be a Thek farmer?" he asked. Sule opened an eye and looked back, then nodded. Ansel shook his head, and then he laughed, a dry, hearty laugh that filled the tiny space. He laughed, and then laughed some more. "Good," he said finally, wheezing. "That's good." Then he sat back down, still chuckling, and then he began to snore. Sule moved to her cot, watching Ansel cautiously. Then she sighed. After everything, he'd still tell her that he loved her, even if the words were empty. Nobody else would ever do that. Sule woke with a start. A rapid series of bangs came from the door. Ansel was already pulling his sword from above the mantel. He peered through the crack, hesitating only a moment before throwing it open. Sule jumped as a man collapsed forwards through the doorway, accompanied by a spray of water and whistling wind. He clutched Ansel's shirt, and Ansel stepped back in surprise. The sword spread to the side. The man was quite round, and his head was hidden by his cloak. When he looked up, still gripping Ansel, Sule immediately recognized his bright blue skin and pudgy face. "Uncle Vada?" said Sule in shock, blinking away her sleep, standing cautiously from behind the chair. "They know," wheezed Vada, out of breath. "They're in the city. The wolves have our scent." "Now, you're sure?" Ansel looked stricken. "I came as quickly as I could," said Vada. "There's a ship, another one checking towns, soldiers in the streets. What else could it be? We must leave at once." "Who?" Sule asked. Vada's panic was contagious. Vada had never acted like this before. He'd usually stop by to drop off a gift for her birthday or talk to Ansel about personal matters. It had been years since she last saw him. "Who are the wolves?" Vada turned to Sule, his bushy white brows raising. "Hello, Sule." He took a labored breath. "You've gotten taller." He turned back to Ansel. "There's been an assassination," he said, waving his arms. "Fasting son, the prince. He looked wearily between her and Ansel. There was a heavy silence in the air as Sule looked between the two men. "They're saying it was Loka. They're tearing the rim apart looking for him. Someone must have cracked now because they're—" Now it was Ansel's turn to grab Vada's coat. "Say the name again," said Ansel, pulling Vada close. Sule had never seen that expression before, like a mix between reverence and madness. "Loka," said Vada, turning away. "It was Loka. I'm sure of it." Ansel closed his eyes, a dam breaking somewhere inside as a look of relief spread across his face. When he removed his hands, they were shaking. "I knew it," he said. "I knew he was alive. How long ago?" "I don't know," said Vada. "It could have been months. It always takes time for the truth to get out." "Too long," growled Ansel. Loka, the heretic? The mad god of pure evil, as they said in the temple? Sule stared at her grandfather with suspicion. Loka was the fallen god, the reason their people had been slaughtered. Why did Ansel look like he was about to get down on his knees and pray? "Sule, put on your coat," said Ansel. "We're leaving now." What? They couldn't leave. Ansel had talked about trouble with the law before, but she'd never taken it seriously. Where would they go? Surely not to the city. Probably to some dirty cave that was even more of a backwater than Dendold. But why? "Because I said so," said Ansel. "That's not an answer." "You talking back to me?" Ansel looked around the small building, made from the clay and the stones of the plains. His finger slid over the drawings carved into the wall that Sule had made when she was a little girl. Ansel's gaze grew distant. In the distance beyond the stone walls, thunder rumbled as of water pattered against the rocks. Vada watched them, rocking from toe to toe. "What does a dead prince have anything to do with us?" asked Sule. She crossed her arms and sat on a bench that had been carved from the stone of the wall. "I won't go anywhere." "Put your shoes on," he said suddenly. Ansel knelt and removed a floorboard, pulling out a box and a large rucksack, the one he kept only for emergencies. Sule's eyes widened. "But, no, I—" Ansel pulled her to her feet and dragged her out the door into the rain. Dendold on the planet Toldrum was safe. Well, about as safe as any planet could be in the Copperhall Rim. Untouched by the timeless great wars, free from the pirate marauders and the dangers of the deep. It was a world outside the flow of time. It was a forgotten place. Except now, someone had remembered it. "Sule!" called Ansel as the pack doll snorted in the wind and the rain chilled her until she shivered. Ansel sat in the creature's mount, a castle-like contraption rising atop its back. The urgency in Ansel's eyes silenced her retort, and Sule bit her tongue and clambered up the rungs. Vada huffed with exertion, pulling himself up behind her. The pack doll snorted again, this time in annoyance. Ansel expertly tapped the side of the creature, and it began to trudge forwards, the pace quickly picking up with further encouragement. The pack doll bleated thunderously, its trunk swaying, and in no time at all they were bounding into the building storm. It all felt like a dream. They'd be back. They always came back in the end. Sule took one last look at the hut through the haze, breathing in the rich scent of wet soil. The dark landscape felt to her in a way that it had never felt before. Foreboding. The landscape flew past like a muddled painting. "Strong season," said Sule. She joined her grandfather on the coachman's bench. "Shame we'll miss it," grunted Ansel. There was a rattling from his bag, and all three of them turned to look at it. Vada reached inside and pulled out a spherical device. Inside its shell, a small wind vane was spinning so fast that it had begun to buzz. "Ship!" shouted Ansel. He pulled the reins and the pack doll bleated. It dropped down and bowed its head. In seconds, with the canopy and the bulbous oilskin bags, they looked little more than another pile of boulders. Overhead, there was a sound like the vibrating chord of an instrument. It resonated in the air, a low droning that Sule felt in her bones, a vibration that sent ripples through the water pooling on the ground. Ansel silenced the device, and they peered out through a slit in the canopy as a dark shape drifted overhead. Sule felt a tug, and watched as the droplets of water running off the edge of the canopy slowed to a crawl. The sound grew louder still, until the raindrops appeared to jolt down before dancing back up, as if they had forgotten which direction to fall. Sule held her breath. For a moment the rain hung there, like little glass spheres, as the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The sound became distant, and the rain bounced violently until it began to fall again. "Are they here for us?" asked Sule, when she was sure they hadn't been seen. "Yes," said Ansel. He looked to Vada wearily. "You were followed." "Let's not be so hasty," said Vada. "They've been checking every village from here to Gadlock. It's a miracle they hadn't checked Dendald before I arrived." "Nobody checks Dendald," Sule muttered. "They do now, dear child," said Vada. "They do now." The arch-traitor himself once ruled Tolgerum and countless others, and he had lost it all when he had tried to challenge the Emperor, the Lord of the Gods. But now he was back, and he had killed the demigod prince of House Vasting, one of the most powerful houses in the Rim. Why? Sule pondered the answer. Did he want to start another war? Didn't he learn his lesson the first time? "Where are we going, anyway?" she asked Ansel. "I'll tell you when we get there," said Ansel. Sule turned and asked the same question to Vada. "A ship," he said. "Well hidden, but close." "A ship!" exclaimed Sule. "You have a ship! How do you have a ship?" They couldn't afford a ship. They were game hunters in Dendald. Vada was a merchant from the city, and even he couldn't afford an actual ship. The sails alone could buy their retirement, yet a ship there was. Sule's mind raced. In the distance there was a faint sound of a horn, and a booming that didn't sound like thunder. Jedham and Oliver. She had to warn them. "The ship was heading towards town," said Sule. "They had to be marauders or something worse." "Be glad they didn't spot us," said Ansel. Sule looked back. She couldn't hear the horn anymore. Had she only imagined it? She clambered out of the harness. She slipped, falling into the red mud which came all the way up to her shins, and began to walk back towards Dendald. "Sule!" yelled Ansel. He slid down and struggled through the mud, his feet lurching deep with every step. "The best we can do for Dendald is never be found." He reached Sule's side as she labored to pull up one foot after another. There was another thunderclap, or was it cannon fire? There were flashes in the distance that lit the sky. The rain washed away her tears. "We can't leave them," she cried. It wasn't fair. Her friends, who wanted Ansel so badly? Nobody else had warships out here. Everyone knew that. They'd loot the town. They'd kill and pillage these wolves of his he refused to name. We can still. She waited for Ansel's outburst, but he just looked at her with a resigned expression, his face streaming with water. "No," Sule whimpered. No, don't look at me like that." "Look at you like what?" "Like they're already dead," said Sule quietly. "We have to go," repeated Ansel, his hand locked around her arm. "You will understand soon." Sule cried out and pummeled Ansel with her fists as he picked her up and carried her back. You're terrible, she sobbed. You big stupid ape. You're killing them. You liar. I hate you. Ansel dumped her back onto the pack doll. Watch her, he growled at Vada. Do you remember what to do if something happens to me? Said Ansel. Sule watched the back of his head with seething anger. Have a party. Find the revisionists on the Rose, said Ansel, ignoring her. They're sympathetic to us Nordlings, at least after the war. That's where we'll go now, until we can find something better. She didn't understand the man. She wished he would just be straight with her. She knew he was still hiding something. This is our home, said Sule. You'll make new friends, said Ansel. Sule narrowed her eyes. She didn't want new friends. She was fine with the ones she had. Ansel dug around his rucksack, pulling out a peculiar wooden pendant on a silver chain. He handed it to her. A peace offering, he said. It belonged to your father. He entrusted it to me when you were a babe. Said to give it to you when you were of age. Suppose now it's close enough. My father, said Sule. She took the pendant with a timid reverence. She squinted at the oddly shaped cylinder. There was a knot of dark wood at one end, with what looked like a face. Maybe like the face of an ancient man, she thought. She turned it, and then thought it looked more like the head of a bird. Did it really belong to her father? Or was Ansel just making that up? He never talked about her parents. Supposedly they died in a mining accident when she was small. She only remembered flashes. She couldn't remember what had happened, or even what they'd looked like. That's all he said, said Ansel. I don't know the significance, but it was his. Sule held up the pendant in front of her face as she stared at it, tracing the faded runes with her finger. It was too heavy to be normal wood. Maybe it was fossilized. There was a peculiar warmth to it, or simply the lack of any chill. She put it around her neck, staring at it in silence. Take this too, said Ansel, pulling a dagger from his belt and flipping it around while offering it to her handle first. You might need it. They continued on, passing into the stone forest, filled with the glittering obsidian boulders stacked high on columns of ancient weathered rock. Nobody went out here. People said it was haunted by demons with glowing eyes that would steal the souls of those who got lost inside. Ansel evidently didn't seem to mind about getting his soul stolen. She hoped that it would be. She didn't speak again until she saw the ship. It was covered in a tarp, perfectly camouflaged. Even as Ansel dismounted and pulled it off, the ship seemed to vanish amongst the rocks. 4 extended legs held it above the ground. The hull was sleek and compact, its edges pulled to taut points at either end. Its masts and sails were furled tightly against its hull, and as she watched, a ramp lowered slowly from the rear and came to a rest. Ansel climbed up the ramp and disappeared inside. It was the first time Sue had ever been this close to a ship before, and she forgot to close her mouth. It looked expensive, even for a starship. In the city, the docks were always off limits to people like her. The Pocklanders, the Wilders, the Mudborn folk, the Thecktenders. City folk in their highborn accents like Ansel, with all their proper pronunciations that sounded like spitting rough gravel. A hand grabbed her wrist as she tried to follow. Vada, what are you? Sule made a move to turn, then stiffened as she felt something cold and sharp press against her neck. Sorry, dear, whispered Vada. Come, Sule, there isn't time for this. Ansel's voice trailed off as he emerged and saw Vada holding her, the dagger at her throat. Vada. Ansel looked on in shock, eyes shifting between them. Then his face fell. What have you done? From all around the rocks emerged figures in gray cloaks. The chrome of swords and rifles glinted in the night. Sule recognized their masks from the legends and Ansel's old bedtime tales. These were Alcuors, the gods' ruthless magicians, accompanied by dozens of soldiers in stone-shaded armor. The Greys. But they couldn't be. Surely it was just some kind of joke, a cruel imitation. Alcuors were legends. They couldn't be real. It was foolish superstition. Why? Said Ansel as he looked at Vada. Because I have his family in the same position as the girl, said a deep voice. A row of greys stepped aside, and a man stepped forwards between them, a smug expression plastered across his square-jawed face. He wore a long black cloak. The strapped leather of his chest was adorned with silver buckles and imperial brands of a great house in muted gold. Imperial brands, not pirate, not marauder, not outer, imperial, on Taldrum. Sule raked her brain, trying to remember which house that brand belonged to. Is this your spawn, Tobin? Said the man. I never saw you as the family type. Tobin? Who was Tobin? Yorick, spat Ansel. His gaze darted between the man and Sule, and then to the ship. The Yorick? There's no hope of escape, said Yorick. We've drained the fuel, and we've cleared your traps. There's nothing coming to save you. He began to walk to the side, and Ansel's gaze followed him. 12 years, he said. I was starting to think we'd never find you. Not until Loka. Yorick stopped, his expression darkening. Not until Loka murdered my son. Things move so fast when the gods get involved. I had 5 men tasked to the job. Now I have the entire Imperial war machine. Imagine my surprise when a little bird sang in my ear of a Nornling sympathizer, and so close to your old home. Why didn't I think the look here is beyond me? I had nothing to do with, started Ansel. You had everything to do with it, screamed Yorick, spittle flying from his mouth. You and your people. We should never have stopped. Not until every last Nornling was wiped from existence. Even the memory somehow persists like a stain. You're all infected by Loka's belief that you can change things. But change brings death. Yorick's voice cracked. The general's mask slammed back into place. Do you know how many children I've watched die in the chaos you created? My son will be the last. His eyes were hard. This was Yorick Vasting? The ruler of House Vasting? One of the most powerful houses in the entire Rim? He was the general, and he was in Dendold on Taldrum, and he was blaming Ansel for the prince that Loka killed? Sule's world spun around her. She was torn between being in awe or terror. Let the girl go, and I come willingly, said Ansel. Tempting, said Yorick. He laughed a cruel laugh, and it was the laugh that immediately made Sule decide terror was the better option. I've gone over this moment again and again, he continued. What it would be like to finally kill Loka's dog. Oh, that didn't sound good at all. Vada, please, begged Sule. Vada looked away. Sule looked around, her eyes darting from the ships to the rocks. There was no pads, there was no feather. She wasn't about to convince this Yorick that he was turning into a chicken. She couldn't see a way out. Not this time. Yorick turned his face into the rain and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes, they glinted like an animal's in firelight. Power crackled around his fingertips as his cloak rippled and his hair flowed up off his shoulders like he was suspended in water. Every hair on Sule's body stood on end, and her skin tingled as something strange and sweet filled the air, like how it smelled after a thunderstorm. Valkyrie. Yorick turned to Vada. It's time for you to join your family. Grail will reward you for your loyalty. Thank you, my lord, sputtered Vada. Thank you so much. A knife flashed and carved deep into Vada's throat, spraying Sule with arterial blood. Sule screamed as he released her. He collapsed onto the ground as he clutched his neck. She stumbled into the center of the clearing and Ansel caught her, pulling her close. She watched Vada twitch, gaping at them until he stopped moving and his eyes glazed over. A shame, truly, said Yorick wistfully. Now where were we? Tobin Aurelius Gadali, in the name of Empire, by authorization of the Imperial Vicar and the Thousand Houses, I sentence you to judgment absolute, for crimes of heresy, for crimes of murder, massacre, genocide. What's he talking about? Whimpered Sule. Her eyes locked forward on Yorick as he began to walk towards them. Hand to the arch-traitor, the god Loka of House Durrell, cursed be his name. By the wail of Grail I find you guilty. The world seemed to slow as Sule looked to Ansel, the pieces beginning to connect into a picture she didn't believe could be true. This was not real. It couldn't be real. How much more could go wrong in such a short time? Yorick's expression was predatory. In that moment, he looked more wolf than human. How do you beg? The Alcuers began to pound their chests, chanting in a guttural language that Sule didn't recognize. Garaktve se vri, skolna kagrachmi, gonda hilder kauda rastak. Sule's eyes widened in horror. Then Ansel grabbed the hem of her coat and pulled her close. When I tell you to run, you run, he hissed violently into her ear. Remember what we talked about. Ansel looked up slowly, facing the chanters. I do not bow to the will of a false god, said Ansel after a moment, raising his voice to be heard above the chanting. And I will never beg to you, Yorick, you grail-vacking psychopathic. Enough! Cried Yorick. Ansel stepped away from her then, and Sule's face went slack, and she looked at him and then at the circle of Alcuers. Run. She'd hardly get 10 paces. Na se gori, sko na kanarach. You are all sheep, Ansel growled, and he spat into the mud. You think Grail's your shepherd? He's the butcher fattening you up for the pen. He keeps you dull so you never try to jump the fence. He met Yorick's eyes, his own burning with fury. You're not the cure, Yorick. You're the rot. He unbuckled his sword and let it fall to the ground. Then he raised his hands and clapped them together. The ensuing clap of thunder was so loud that Sule fell back, covering her ears. Yorick, too, took a step back. She looked at Ansel, standing there as the rain ran off him, and realized the man who had raised her was a stranger. He was a ghost, an apparition that only looked like her grandfather. Sule didn't know anything. Her eyes unfocused as her world began to fray apart at the seams as she stared onward with stunned disbelief. Surely her uncle wasn't like Yorick. He couldn't be an Alcuer. You pig, spat Ansel. Spat Tobin, if that was his real name. You're like the mold on my cheese that's gone. Sule's vision swam and her ears popped as she cringed away. Ansel was stumbling back, his cloak smoldering as lightning burned from Yorick's outstretched hand into his. Ansel flung out his other hand, and a pair of alcuars fell in a flash. "Now!" Ansel yelled, dancing back. Another arc of power shot from his outstretched fingertips, striking the soldiers moving to fill the gap. They screamed as their armor melted to a white-hot slag. Bile rose in Sule's throat as a wave of intense heat and the smell of cooked flesh filled the air. Droplets of burning hot metal spraying in a fine mist across her skin. Sule ran, disoriented by the flashes of light and thunderous sound. She tumbled into the mud, sprang up on all fours and kept running. She jumped over the fallen men, the melted armor popping and spitting in the rain. The light illuminating the ground tracked her as she sprinted towards the rocks. The pack doll. Where was the pack doll? "Go after her!" yelled Yorick. Sule glanced back as her grandfather's motion became a blur. The bursts of light and arcs of energy were too fast for her to follow. It was a slideshow of light and dark. Ansel twisted and danced, his cloak discarded. The arcs of light bent around him as he stood in front of her, falling into the mud and detonating in violent explosions of steam. "You've gotten slow, old man," cried Yorick in a blur of speed. His steps were methodical, unwavering. Her grandfather was an alcuar? The truth was right in front of her. As she watched, Sule thought Ansel might be winning. Then several bolts made it through his defense, and he tumbled into the mud and lay still. "No!" screamed Sule. She turned and ran between the rocks, jumping between boulders and around jagged outcroppings. The voices of the soldiers were close behind, yelling instructions into the dark. The searchlight roamed over the rocks. Sule had just crossed to the other side of the hill when a loud buzzing filled the air. A winged grey dropped in her path. "Give up, girls," said the Shodnock as it was illuminated by the light. His wide grin filled with pointy teeth. Sule turned. She could see the soldiers close behind. She drew the knife from her cloak and pointed it towards the outer. The creature laughed, if folding metal could be called a laugh. Another Shodnock soldier landed behind her, pulling a sword. Sule flung herself against the nearest obsidian rock and began to climb. She'd nearly reached the top when a shape flew from the darkness, hitting her in the face. She fell back and lay in the water, stunned and gasping for breath. Rough hands grabbed her before she could rise, pulling her back towards the clearing. The outer's grip was like iron. It was facing the general. Yorick barely glanced at her, grabbing her by the arm as he pulled her forwards like one might a disobedient animal. Yorick held her up by her wrist, and Sule cried out. He held her so that she faced Ansel in the mud. Yorick gestured, and a man walked to Ansel's side and pulled his head up from the water by his hair, twisting Ansel's face to hers. "Say goodbye to your girl," said Yorick. Ansel groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "No." Yorick drove his sword into Sule's back. It was a cold that scraped on her bones, that sent shocks like ice, the kind of cold that shouldn't be. She choked once, and looked down at the blade protruding from her body. Then it was gone and she was falling. Oh, today was not her day at all. "No!" screamed Ansel in anguish. There was an explosion of light, and an alcuar was thrown back. With a snarl, Ansel was free. A blast of light and superheated air. Ansel ran towards Sule, rage and fear written across his face. Then Yorick stepped over her and gestured with a hand. Ansel never reached her. The lightning came from every direction. He fell into the mud and never moved again. She hated him then, in her final moments. The faceless god she'd never know. Loka. He'd done this. This was his fault. Ansel was dead. They'd killed him. They'd killed her. If only... Then the darkness took her far away to a different place, one without pain, without cold. Sule died. Thunder still rumbled across the sky, but there was no rain. There hadn't been rain for quite some time. The land was barren and covered in white sand. The girl sat up, looking around herself, and up at the roots of the grand tree that towered above her. Its branches were bare, its wood trained of all color. A wind chime rustled, tinkling faintly. A raven cawed, landing on one of the branches, watching her with its yellow eyes. "Am I dead?" the girl asked. "Is this after?" A second raven joined the first. It was smaller, and it cocked its head to the side as if it might understand her. The girl blinked, and realized then that there was a woman standing before her. The woman's skin was wrinkled, and her back was bent with age. Her clothing was old and dirty. The girl reached out a hand and touched the woman's shoulder. The woman turned, and she had no face. The girl stepped back, tripping on a root as fear spread across her face. Suddenly the girl felt very, very small, like she was merely an ant at the foot of a giant animal about to step on her. The tree moaned, its wood creaking, and the ravens cawed and took flight. The ground shook, and the roots of the tree tore themselves free of the sand, wrapping themselves around her legs. The girl couldn't breathe. She watched the tree consume the faceless woman, roots and branches pulling the nameless soul into the bark like it was the mud of the flats. And then there was nothing left. The tree changed, and the girl blinked, not sure how she'd missed it before. Formed in the pattern of its bark and the gnarls of the trunk, it watched her, an ancient mother. Then the roots began to tighten and tighten around the girl until she thought her ribs would crack and her head burst. They slid over her like snakes, roots forcing their way into her mouth, her ears, her nose. The tree expanded in her vision until it became her entire world. She saw it had a new face, no longer the face of the woman, like the face of an ancient man, like... It spoke to her then, a horrible voice that consumed every thought. "You," said the tree that was everything. "What are you?" The roots stretched into the deep, into all things, into every mind. For the tiniest of moments, Sule could see Grail, and Grail could see her.